Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's wonderful to have those of you who are joining us here and those at home. Tonight is our Wow Worship, a night in which we try to learn a little bit more about our service. We'll have a Torah service this evening, wonderful Torah portion, by the way. And we also enjoy the additional music that Aaron Freed brings with him. And so we'll get to hear the cello this evening, as well as piano and guitar, along with Cantor Kathy, and enjoy the service. And so for those who are joining us from home or those who are here, we thank you for joining us for Shabbat. We'll start with lighting our candles. The prayer is found on page 3 and 2. O source of light and truth, creator of the eternal law of goodness, help us to find knowledge by which to live. Lead us to take the words that we shall speak into our hearts and our lives. Bless all who enter this sanctuary in need, all who bring the offerings of their hearts. May our worship lead us to acts of kindness, peace, and love.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu le'adlik ner shel Shabbat.
Amen. We take time now to walk back through our week. We look back at, as Jewish people and American people, we look back at this week to last Shabbat, and many people today especially have commented that we can't believe last Shabbat was so destructive, and that we spent it yet again in fear and sadness of what happened inside a synagogue, inside any house of worship, an act of violence, and we've spent the following 6 days trying to process it. And so we come back to Shabbat to pray that this be a day full of peace, not of fear, a day to perhaps, as we said when we were kids, let's have a redo. Let's redo this and make this Shabbat what it should be. So we'll do that this evening by sharing our prayers and our music, as we always do. I'm also going to share some words from Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker, who I think needs no introduction anymore, and share some of the prayers that he's written and prayers that have been written this week. As we often say, it's sometimes during the hardest times in life that we find ourselves with the most prayerful words right on the tips of our tongue. And so there's been a lot shared this week, a lot worthy of sharing this evening. So we take last week, we put it into the history books behind us. We look forward. We welcome Shabbat, beginning page 20 with the words of Lecha Dodi.
Ya la 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 lecha Dodi, ya la 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 likra kala, ya la 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 panei Shabbat, panei Shabbat nekabela. Ya la 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 lecha Dodi, ya la 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 likra kala, ya la 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 panei Shabbat nekabela. Ya la 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 lecha Dodi, ya la 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 likra kala, ya la 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 panei Shabbat nekabela. likrakala, ya la la la, Pnei Shabbat Neka, Bella, ya la la la, Chadodi, ya la la la, likrakala, ya la la la, Pnei Shabbat Neka, Bella.
Please rise and face our entrance or the entrance to your home as we welcome Shabbat.
Boi v'shalom ateret bala, gam b'simcha ha'v'zacha, toch emuni lama segula, boi chala, boi chala. Ya la 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 l'chadodi, ya la 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 l'krakala, ya la 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 Pnei Shabbat Neka, Bella. Ya la 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 l'chadodi, ya la 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 l'krakala, ya la 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 Pnei Shabbat Neka, Bella.
Page 26, please remain standing.
Yikada v'ikada shemei rabba, be'alma divrach tirotei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uvyamechon, uvchayetecha beit Yisrael, ba'agala, uvizman kari, v'yimeru, amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach, le'alam u'almei almaya, Yitbarach, Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpar, V'yitrama, V'yitnasi, V'yitadar, V'yitalit, V'yitalal, Shemid Kadesha Barichu, Le'elam min kol brachata v'shirata, Tushbechata v'nechemata, Da'amiran ve'alma, V'yimeru, Amen.
Page 28, our Baruch.
Yai la 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 la. Yai la 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 la. Yai la 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 la. Yai la 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 la. Yai la 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 la. Yai la 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 la. Yai la 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 la. Yai la 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 la. Baruch hu et Adonai, Hamevorach. Baruch Adonai, Hamevorach, Hamevorach, le'olam va'id. Hamevorach, Hamevorach, le'olam va'id.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro, ma'ariv, aravim, blessed are you, God, who allows us to take note of this changing moment, this time in which we turn day into night, and in which we turn pain and fear and hate into love. As I share this prayer, written by Karen Kadar, not in our prayer books, in this time of uncertainty and fear, do not let me rest, God. Send me forth that I may restore what is broken, to heal what is wounded, and engage in acts of love with great and unrelenting determination. I shall do something kind and necessary for someone else. May this be my answer to my pain. Baruch atah Adonai. Ohev Amo Yisrael, let us know once again that we are blessed with the great presence of love. Shema, page 34, 35.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kavod, Shem Kavod, Malakuto, Leolam, Leolam Ba'id. And thou shalt love Adonai thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might.
Be seated if you'd like.
And all these words which I command you on this day shall be in my heart, shall be in thy heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and thou shalt speak of them when thou sittest in thy house, when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up, and when thou risest up, and thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy head, and they shall be for frontlets between thine eyes, and thou shalt write them on the doorposts of thy house, and upon thy gates, upon thy gates, that ye may remember and do all of my commandments, and be holy unto your God, unto your God, unto your God.
A Christian colleague called me today with a question about the Torah. I was honored that he called to ask, what do you do with, in Exodus, Moses' family has Egyptians in it. He marries an Egyptian woman, and he has children who have an Egyptian mother. And what about the mixed multitude that we read about last week? As they leave Egypt, it's a mixed multitude of peoples, not just Israelites. Ever since the very beginnings of us being a people, we've always been a people that's been diverse, so long as we've had a choice to do so. I would argue that only during the times in which we've been forced to be separated have we actually not been mixed with other peoples. Which is why when we share our prayers and we look towards moments of freedom and tell our story from Egypt to the Promised Land, we aren't speaking simply of the Israelite people. We're speaking of all of those people who needed to march from slavery to freedom. And so we share the prayer on page 39, remembering in this moment, in the shadow of last week, that we find our greatest sense of freedom in those whom we are allies with and who are allies with us as we stand together. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, and that there is a better place, a promised land, and the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness. There's no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. Micha Mocha, page 40.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש, נורא תהילות עושה פלא, נורא תהילות עושה פלא. מלכותך ובניך קיים לפני משה זה אלינו ואמרו זה אלינו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד מי כמוך באלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נורא תהילות עושה פלא נורא תהילות עושה פלא. Ashkivenu on the following page, page 42. Words and music by Josh Goldberg. As I lay my head to rest, will you watch over me? Shield me from danger in the shelter of your wings and illuminate my dreams. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom V'hamidenu shamreinu l'chayim when the moon slips out of sight and the sun comes out to shine, will you return my soul to me when I open up my eyes? Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom v'hamidenu shamreinu l'chayim ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom v'hamidenu shamreinu l'chayim
We turn to pray as if everything depends on God, even as we remind ourselves to act, knowing that everything might depend on us. We rise, page 46. We face our ark. For our most personal prayers, the words of our Amidah.
Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi agita hilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachav, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לפני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם. מחכה חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל.
אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. Baruch atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. Please be seated. So when someone becomes famous, it's nice to try to jump on their coattails. So I want to tell you how I know Charlie Citron Walker, which is that when I was a first year, when I was just starting rabbinical school, the seminary picks a couple students to stay over the summer to be essentially the graduate school version of your resident assistant, the person who orients you to what on earth rabbinical school is like. And the year I started the seminary, they picked this young, very happy, menschy guy, Charlie Citron Walker. And so he spent the summer with us, and he told us all about what our next 5 years would be, and how we could be successful students, and he was sort of our automatic big brother. And so as we've come to know him nationally this week, one of the things I told a reporter earlier this week, and that I've shared with others, is that I find really part of the heroism of what he's displayed is that he's been fully himself and very authentic. And what you hear is, it's not the version of a rabbi who's putting on a show for the country to see him on a national stage, but rather the same rabbi that you would see if he was in this room or a room with just a couple people. And I think you'll get that from this prayer that he wrote. As we prepare for our prayer for peace, here are the words from Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker that he wrote himself. We are not helpless. We bring healing with Band-Aids and hugs, a cup of coffee and chicken soup. We are not helpless. We bring healing with a text, a call, a card, a response that says you are not alone. We are not helpless. We bring healing with acceptance and patience, understanding for ourselves and for others. We are not helpless. We bring healing with words of compassion and acts of compassion, reaching out with care and love. We are not helpless. We bring healing to heart and mind, body and soul. We bring healing every day because we are not helpless. Shalom Rav, page 60. Our prayer that we remind ourselves that we want this great sense of overwhelming peace to find its way to our world. And, as he would say, that we are not helpless in bringing it here. Page 60, we share these words together.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. 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 Ki ata melech Adon
take a few moments for silent meditation. I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. And it flows like a river, it flows like a river. It flows like a river in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. And it flows like a fountain, it flows like a fountain, it flows like a fountain in my soul. I've got love like the ocean, I've got love like the ocean, I've got love like the ocean in my soul. And it flows like the ocean, it flows like the ocean, it flows like the ocean in my soul. Sim shalom tova tova uvracha chimba chesed Sim shalom tova tova uvracha chimba chesed v'rachami. I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river in my soul. And it flows like a river, it flows like a river, it flows like a river in my soul.
Shabbat Shalom. So I'm going to try and attempt something that Carrie would tell you is miraculous for me to attempt, and that is to do two things at once. I'm going to read Torah this evening and give my words in the midst of the Torah portion while I'm reading it, in part because I think this is always, Yitro, which is our Torah portion this week, it has the Ten Commandments in it, and some people would say, well, that's what makes it special. I love Yitro for a whole other reason, not to do with the Ten Commandments, although you should try and follow those. And that is for the story that opens the Torah portion, the relationship between Jethro, which is our English way of saying Yitro, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, and Moses. And this is where we find out what that relationship looks like. It's an incredible, I find it to be an incredible story, and so we'll share that. Tonight I'll share it in light of what I at least have been thinking about in these last 6 days, and how I think it has some lessons, perhaps, or perhaps some lenses to help us look through what's happened in this last week, and where we go from here. So, please join us in the Torah service as we'll turn towards our ark and take our Torah scroll from the ark itself. Please rise.
Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, u'devar Adonai mirushalayim. Baruch shenatan Torah Torah, Baruch shenatan Torah Torah, le'amo Yisrael b'kedushato. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonai, Kadosh Shemo, Gadolu Adonai iti, Unaram Mema Shemo Yakdav. Lecha Adonai Hagedula v'Hagavura v'Hatiferet v'Hanetzach v'Hahod Ki Ko b'Shamayim u'Va'aretz Ki Ko b'Shamayim u'Va'aretz Lecha Adonai HaMamlacha v'Hamid Naseh L'chol Rosh.
Please be seated. Reading, I'm doing this from memory, I think it's chapter 18, verse 1. For anybody who magically picked up a Chumash on their way in, which I'm sure nobody did. But, in case you did, I've now told you that we're chapter 18, verse 1, I believe. Let's say the Torah blessing upon the beginning of the reading. Baruch hu et Adonai Amborach. Baruch Adonai Amborach
le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Amborach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amin. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So to start doing two things at once. Before I share the Torah, I think it'll be obvious when I'm reading from the Torah. I was in my first set of interviews for my first ever real job, we could say. I interviewed with a very prominent congregation. I was one of many people who interviewed with them. And they had a rabbi who was very successful as the senior rabbi. And in the interview, they came to the campus to interview a series of students. In the interview, the congregant who came with the rabbi continued to look at me during the interview and say the same phrase over and over again. He kept saying, "You have to understand, this is America's rabbi." And I was nervous for the interview, and now I've got this guy telling me that I'm in front of America's rabbi, and I couldn't hold it together. I didn't get the job. But the idea that America would have a rabbi that represents all of America at any one given time in my lifetime has never been the case until this week. How can we not look at what Rabbi Citron Walker has done in this last week and the way, I think amazingly, in which he has gone in front of the media and talked to reporters and been on. If you haven't listened to his interviews, I would highly encourage you to do so on CBS and NPR and CNN and everywhere else where he's been interviewed and spoken incredibly well. And for this week at least, he's become America's rabbi. That being said, I continue to believe, and my point tonight, which I think the Torah portion helps us to make, is that America doesn't need a chief rabbi. That has never been what we have desired. And it actually, while wonderful to watch, is not what saves us from anti-Semitism. So, let me share the first of three sections of the Torah portion. Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midian, Chotain Moshe. And Jethro, a priest of Midian, who was the father-in-law of Moses. Vayishma et kol asher asa Elohim lemoshe ul Yisrael amo, ki hotzi Adonai et Yisrael mi Mitzrayim. Jethro, a priest in Midian, who was Moses' father-in-law, listened to everything that God had done for the Israelites when they came out of Egypt. In rabbinical school, we spent half a semester on just this verse. Because the rabbis, the medieval rabbis, they asked endlessly, how on earth does a priest from another religion hear God doing God's work for the Israelite people? And what did he hear? Their shock is that there would be somebody who doesn't know us or understand us or recognize us and who is not a part of our tribe. They can't imagine that somebody would listen to what is going on in our world. And yet, as we read the story, what Jethro does by listening first opens up a whole world for Moses. And so the first lesson or lens from this Torah portion this week is, are we able to listen to those who aren't in our own world? Having lived in Los Angeles, and perhaps you could say in Atlanta as well, but I attach it most to Los Angeles, in a city where you live in your car from place to place. Even though I loved living there, one of the challenges I always felt was you really didn't know who was around you because everybody was in their own bubble. You went from your house to your school or to work. There was no reason to interact with anybody in between. And anybody who you might see on the street, you couldn't hear. And if somebody was sitting in their car yelling or screaming or joyous, you had no idea, because you can't hear anybody other than yourself. And there's great peace in that at times, but there's also a great sense of disconnect. This week, one of the challenges that we faced, that many is now a part of a national Jewish discussion, is the incredible silence after what happened on Saturday. I want to quote my good friend and Rabbi Danny Berkman, who's in the Boston area. He wrote the following, and I think it's the best sense of how many of us have felt this week. He writes, "A terrorist attack was perpetrated on American soil, with American citizens held hostage in their place of worship for 11 hours. But in the aftermath, there was almost silence. Yes, there have been interviews with Rabbi Charlie, and yes, there has been some coverage of events in the news. But this should have been the front page story. It was at the bottom of page 10 in the Boston Globe on Sunday, in case you were wondering. Rabbi Charlie should have become a household name for his courageous and heroic actions. And where were the messages of support for the Jewish community? Where are the lawn signs standing against anti-Semitism or standing with Congregation Beth Israel? Where is the outrage about what happened?" I had the same experience. I watched last week as if Tree of Life was happening again, but the difference was that it was quite different. It wasn't on every news station. They didn't cut out of the latest gossip as I flipped through the channels in order to tell you what was happening. And even the next day, as Rabbi Berkman says, it wasn't the front page of the papers. If you remember, 3 years ago, there in Hebrew letters on the front of the papers was Mourner's Kaddish. And this year, for some reason, it's page 10. There are lots of theories, but let's continue with Torah. So, the first thing Jethro does is listen. The second thing he does is act. Here's how the Torah says it. V'yikach Yitro chotein Moshe, and Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, took et Zipporah, Eshet Moshe, his wife Zipporah, the wife of Moses, Achar Shlochecha, after she had gone to return home, Ve'et Shnei Baneha, Asher Sham Ha'achad, Gershom, and her 2 sons, the first of whom's name is Gershom. They like to tell you why he's named that. He's named Gershom, Ki Amar Ger Chayiti Be'eretz Nochreha, because he was a stranger in a foreign land. V'sham Ha'achad, the second son, Eliezer, And he's named Eliezer, Ki Elohei Avi Be'ezri, V'yitzlenu Mechorev Paro. He's named Eliezer because Elohei Avi, the God of his father, was Be'ezri, his help, and saved him from the sword of Pharaoh. V'yavo Yitro Choten Moshe Uvanav V'ishto El Moshe El Hamidbar Asher Hu Chine Sham Har HaElohim. And Jethro brings the family of Moses, his wife and his sons, out into the wilderness to where he is camped at the foot of God's mountain. First, Jethro listens. The second thing, he doesn't say a word. The second thing he does is he acts, and he goes and he takes the wife and children of Moses to meet Moses where he is. And so the second lesson of this week, it's not just that we don't hear each other, but even when we do hear each other, we're not responding to each other. Following Pittsburgh, we showed up the next morning here, and our doorstep was flooded with cards and with chalk writing. People had immediately gone into action that day. We had countless emails and phone calls, and within, I think, 72 hours, if I remember correctly, we had a vigil at the JCC so large that we couldn't even fit in the room, with speakers from all different faiths and different communities. So maybe people hear what's happening and still don't respond. This time, I heard multiple times from our friends at the mosque. They responded. I had 3 emails from them. Wonderful outreach both during the hostage crisis and once it was resolved. But as I'm thinking about this week, I'm also listening to the news. There are nurses at hospitals who are in COVID floors who, because of the protocols, they don't have any help, so they have to take the food to the patients. They have to dress the patients' beds. They have to do the job of 3 or 4 or 5 people. And as we know, many of them are choosing to leave their profession. And a nurse that was being interviewed is telling us, in feelings quite similar to how I felt last Saturday, this is a crisis. Our nurses are walking out the front door of our hospitals, and you won't get good care. And he's saying, but nobody's responding. This morning on the radio, they're looking at the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade and it possibly being overturned. And they interview the people who were activists 50 years ago, and they say, what are you going to do? They say, we're too old. Most of us aren't even around anymore. It's up to this generation, and we're not sure if they're going to show up. I talked to a friend, a Jewish friend, about this issue of the silence we've heard this week. She says, I thought about all the people, the black men who've been hurt, and I didn't call anybody when it hit the news. I didn't think to reach out. Somehow, whether COVID has forced us into our cars, our bubbles, like I lived in LA, where we don't listen to what's happening, or whether COVID has told us that we're so tired of constantly caring for other people and solving crises that we don't have the energy to try and solve another one. It seems to be that somehow we're not taking the second step of acting, at least not as much as perhaps we could. So the third section of the Torah portion. Finally, Jethro says something. Vayomer, and he spoke, El Moshe to Moses, Ani chotencha, I am your father-in-law. My name is Jethro. Bo elecha ve'ishtecha, I come to you with your wife, Ushnei baneha, and your 2 children, Ima, with her. V'yotzei Moshe likrat chotno v'yishtachavu, and Moses came close to him, he bowed down on the ground, vayishach lo, and he kissed him. This, perhaps, I think, is the most beautiful line of the portion. V'yishalu ish l're'ehu l'shalom. And each one of them turned to each other and said, how are you? Shalom. V'yavo'u ha'olah. They went into the tent. V'yasaper Moshe l'chotno et kol asher asa Adonai lefaro u'mitzrayim all odot Yisrael. They went into the tent, the two of them alone, and Moses started telling his story. The story of the Israelite people who overcame great strides with Pharaoh and left Egypt, and who now were on their way, matzatem bederech v'yetzalem Adonai, on the path that God had laid for them. V'yachad yitro al kol hatova, and Jethro saw that this was a good thing. Asher asa Adonai leYisrael, which God had made, asher hitzili miyad Mitzrayim, that he had brought them out by a strong hand from Egypt. And this, I have to say, you should all take a deep breath, because this is a moment you should be in awe, because it's a shocking moment in the Torah. It won't feel like a shocking moment to you, but if you put your mindset into the mindset of the ancient Near East, Jethro, a non-Israelite priest, turns to Moses after hearing his story, and he says words that'll be familiar to you. Vayomer Yitro, Jethro said, Baruch Adonai, Asher Hatzil Etchem. Blessed is Adonai, who's brought you out and made you free. The conclusion of the story of Jethro is he sits with Moses, he listens to Moses' story, and then he blesses him. So this week, what I feel we've missed is not having a rabbi who is America's rabbi. We've never needed a rabbi who represents all of us, not one who speaks for us or directs us or saves us. We've always needed other people, friends outside of our community, allies who hear us and act on our behalf and know us face to face in conversation. We've needed a Yitro, somebody who can sit with us. And some of that's on us. We have to roll down our windows. We have to speak about what it feels like, and some people have been doing that this week. I'm not very good at doing that. I prefer to post pictures of my dog, as some of you saw. But the truth is, part of the problem of living in LA is that you're in your own car, and you have to roll down your window, and you have to speak up and say what's going on if you want somebody else to react. So we need to share with our friends what this week felt like. And we need to remember that we're not unique. This was our week in which we felt the feeling of victimhood. But other weeks, there are other victims, and we have to be the ones who speak up. And of course, there's a COVID factor in all of this. We have to listen better because COVID has separated us, and so we don't hear people's stories in the hallway, and we don't bump into them in the mall, and we don't see them at holiday parties. We have to find the energy to act, to send a note, to make a call, to show up, virtually or not, because COVID has exhausted us, and we have forgotten, in a lot of ways, how to show up for people. And we have to relearn how to be with each other around a table, at community vigils, and around a dinner table. This is the time of year in which we start our Interfaith Justice series, where we go and learn about justice, but as for any of you who've participated, then we sit down and we have a dinner that's longer than the discussion. And it's the time where we have a community Seder, where we welcome 100 people into this space in order to have the experience of Passover. COVID makes all of these things near impossible. So how are we going to gather around a table with people who have a different story than ours? How are we going to relearn that skill? I don't know yet, but I think that this week's story, as I hope you feel, is a great reminder of how important it is. Yitro goes on to mentor Moses. Moses goes on to lead the people with Yitro's advice not to do it alone, to do it with other people, and he elects judges. So we'll read that down the road. I want to close with this prayer, and then we'll conclude our service. Holy One of blessing, grant us the will to stand firm in the face of evil and hostility, not to be silent or afraid, to work diligently and faithfully to banish wickedness from the earth. Holy One of blessing, grant us the courage and resolve to speak when there is hatred, to act when there is confusion, to join with others in building a world of safety, understanding, and acceptance. Because there is hate, dear God, help us heal our fractured and broken world. Because there is fear, dear God, grant courage and faith to those in need. Because there is pain, dear God, bring healing to the shattered and wounded. Because there is hope, dear God, teach us to be a force for justice and kindness. And because there is love, help us to be a beacon of light and compassion. We close our Torah with the words of the blessing of the Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Please rise as we prepare to dress the Torah.
V'zot haTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael. Api Adonai b'yad Moshe. Yadalai, yadalai, yadalai,
Please be seated as we turn to page 253, the words of Mishabera.
Mishabera avoteinu mekor haracha. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen.
There's a name you'd like to share. Please share it as we look around the room.
Mishabera avoteinu mekor haracha imotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Please rise as we'll return the Torah to the ark.
Et haim hi lemachzikim ba v'tomecha melusha deracheha derchino mitzvotav shalom. Hashivenu Adonai Eilecha v'nashuva Chodesh Chodesh Yameinu Chodesh Yameinu Kekedim.
Page 282.
Aleinu l'shabech l'adon hakol, l'tikdu l'aliotzer v'reishit, shelo asanu k'goyei haratzot, velo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, shelo samchakenu kahem v'goraleinu k'chol hamonam, v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim, lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh Baruch Hu v'nemar v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yiyeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad.
Please be seated. Our thoughts turn now to those who've departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss and of life and death. We continue to remember those that we've recently lost in our community: Phyllis Sugarman, William J. Stern, Barak Amrani, Samuel Clements, and Mara Kay. We add to their names those that we remember on this week: John Barry, Sam Burloff, Ira Berman, Mary S. Kahn, Adelaide Evans, Louis Gertz, Marcia Gitterman, Harry B. Gross, Sarah Hopfman, Frida Jacobs, Ruth Jacobs, Rita Marie Johnson, Bertie Kahn, Ann Kavar, Sunny Kay, Ingrid H. Levitt, Lila Marks, Susan Miller, Frida Netler, Abe Ostrov, Marvin Perelman, Richard Plotkin, Nathan Ross, Sonia Ross, Irving Schulman, Esther Shapiro, Henry Silverman, Ben Sugar, Glenn Torch, Dr. Alvin M. Weil, Bernard J. Wise, and Frank Zach. If there are names I mispronounced or names you'd like to share, please share them now. We rise, page 294, as we remember our loved ones with the dear words of Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, be'alma divrach yerutei, v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, v'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru, amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'olam almei almaya, yitbarak v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal, shemei dekudashah barichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, Damiran be'alma v'imru, amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, huya asei shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Having honored those that we've loved and lost, we honor each other as we bless each other with the words of the priests. May God bless you and keep you. May God's light shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May you feel God's presence within you always. May you find peace. Please remain standing for Kiddush and Motzi, as we'll find those blessings, page 5 in the prayer book.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'rotzavanu ושבת קודש ואהבה ורצון הנחיל לנו, זיכרון למעשה בראשית, כי הוא ים תחילה למקראי קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. כי בנו בחרת, אותנו קידשת מקיימים, ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו, ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, המוציא לחם מן הארץ. אמן.
Please be seated. Elaine, are you doing announcements? No? Yes? No? Next week is our Interfaith Youth Shabbat. So we hope that you'll join us. Our Interfaith Youth groups are going to be joining us virtually. Please check your weekly email. We have the ability to be in person for those of you who are members of the congregation, but our guests will be joining us virtually, and they've sent in their questions in advance. So we hope you'll join us for that. And we want to point your attention to the weekly email to register now for Shabbat services, and please bring a photo ID when you come, and of course keep wearing your masks. We hope that the world continues to get healthier. Perhaps a little bit warmer would be nice, and we look forward to times when we can gather once again all together. Any other important announcements that I'm missing? No? Thank you to Aaron. Thank you for being here. We'll close with a word, with prayer that's been special for us over these last 2 years, especially as spaces have become incredibly important to us that we have been able to make sacred. And we thank Aaron once again for bringing his cello along so we can have that added to our service. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving. I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Ve'asuli mikdash v'shakanti v'tocham ve'anachnu mevarech yah ve'ata ve'adolam. Please join me. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving. I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Shabbat Shalom.